Hello and welcome to our Fair Chance hiring series. I am Alex Love, a collaborator at Levelsaw, and today I am joined by Solomon.
Thank you, Alex. Hi, everybody. My name is Solomon. I too am a collaborator with LevelSet, where I support our work in developing community partnerships. And really excited about the conversation that we have today. Alex and I have the pleasure to be joined by Stan Ball, who is the Vice President and Chief Litigation Counsel at Eaton. So really excited to welcome you to our conversation series here, Stan. And I'm going to kick it over to Alex, who will begin our discussion with a set of questions.
Thank you so much. Stan, so we know that Eaton is one of the co-chairs of the Second Chance Business Coalition. We'd love to know more about Eaton and why it's been chosen to recently highlight fair chance hiring.
Well, thank you, Alex and Solomon. I appreciate the invitation to be with you. It's always good to see your smiling faces. So for folks who are not familiar with Eaton, I guess I should start with what is an Eaton. We're an intelligent power management company. We're based in Ireland, but we have a significant presence in the United States. And when you think about our company, the best way I would say is anything that moves, anything that requires power, we're involved. And so our business is split up into two sectors. We have the industrial sector where we make component parts for vehicles, electric vehicles. We focus on electrification of the infrastructure. So replacing, your traditional gas stations with EV charging stations. When you switch over to the aerospace business, we make component parts for airplanes. One of my favorite products that we make is called a lightning isolator. Look it up if you're scared of lightning strikes from airplanes, but we help protect those planes when they're in the sky. And then the other sector that's really important to us is our electrical sector, where we make anything from transformers, power closers. If you look up on a power line and kind of wonder, hey, what's that bucket looking thing that's up there, making sure that power gets into houses, that's us. So we take great pride in the fact that we are able to help communities and individuals all around the world have power, have reliable power, and have safe power. Now, in terms of give you a sense of our size and our scope, we have around 85,000 employees around the world. We sell products in 175 countries. So we are truly a global company. In terms of how we got involved with Second Chance hiring, our CEO and chairman, Craig Arnold, is a part of the Business Roundtable. And after the murder of George Floyd, the Business Roundtable established a number of subcommittees focused on social justice and equitable justice. And so he chaired the Equitable Justice Subcommittee that was in part responsible for focusing on reentry. And as a part of the Business Roundtable, they put forth a portfolio of public policies at the national level that would make it easier for folks to re-enter society, because we all know the statistics around the number of Americans who are incarcerated and who re-enter society on an annual basis. One of the things, and I promise I'll kind of wrap up the answer here, but one of the things that we noticed as a part of putting that portfolio together was that we can go to Washington all day, we can push our leaders all day to affect policy, but at the end of the day, one of the biggest determining factors of recidivism is there steady employment? Does the individual have an opportunity to set up a new life for themselves? And as we sit around the table and we have 85,000 employees and that company has 100,000 and this company has 200,000, we realize that we don't have to wait on Washington to do anything. There's an opportunity for us to adjust our hiring practices, to go out and actively recruit individuals, bring them into our organization, and reduce the recidivism rates internally without having to wait for public policies to get pushed through.
That's great, Stan, and really, really helpful background and context setting, and awesome to hear just a little bit more about the company and some of the efforts that have transpired now through your involvement with the Second Chance Business Coalition. Curious, in your role, you're certainly expected to always consider the risk and liability of the company. And so, Stan, can you describe a little bit how you were able to make the business case for fair chance hiring and how you were really able to kind of galvanize that kind of buy-in and support that's really needed to push these kind of efforts forward?
Solomon, I got to give it to you. That's one of the nicest ways that I've ever heard someone say, a lawyer's traditional role is to say no to everything. That was the kindest way. I appreciate that. You and I have to be friends after this. But in all seriousness, when you think about risk, particularly as it pertains to second chance hiring and I'm going to use a word I don't normally use. And people talk about ex-felons. That's what they do, felons and people who are coming out. I prefer to use the word justice involved individuals. But how this gets teed up inside an organization when you talk about risk is the headline of, you're saying that you want our company to go out and hire a bunch of ex-felons and don't care about what the severity of the crime that they created, and it's going to open up our organization to a whole bunch of negligent hiring claims and violent acts and all types of things. That's the headline that normally comes out. But when you look at the statistics and you have an educated conversation and you bring people to the table and you say, let's talk exactly about what you're concerned about. What is that? And before we jump to this extreme, let's also have an educated discussion about what are our current hiring practices. And one of the things that we learned as we were bringing people to the table is that we already had pretty significant hiring practices and background check practices that were in line, and in some cases, far ahead of traditional ban-the-box principles and ban-the-box practices. And so before we even started the coalition, before we said, hey, this is an area where we're going to intentionally focus on, when we looked at the statistics, going back to 2018, 10% of the hires that we have for our organization were justice-involved individuals. So this big fear, this headline that people were scared of, well, congratulations. These folks are already a part of our organization. They're already being successful. They're already advancing your organization. So I think step number one is to, when you broach this topic from a risk perspective and a business perspective, is to understand where is your organization at right now, today. The second thing that's important from just a lawyer risk perspective, and then I'll pause for comments or commentary that you may have. But the second thing I think is really important is to understand what exactly negligent hiring is, and how often in the jurisdictions in which you operate, how often do companies get hit for that? Because the real way that you see risk, high levels of risk in the negligent hiring space, is if you have someone who has a number of DUIs, a number of reckless driving practices on their record, and their job is to drive a tractor for your company or to drive a vehicle from place to place. That's an area where you traditionally see negligent hiring. But if someone's justice involvement or their record has absolutely nothing to do with their day job, and there are not regulatory barriers, the risk that we're talking about is significantly reduced. And then it becomes, okay, how do we make an intelligent, individualized assessment of this person to see if they're a proper fit for our organization, not necessarily focusing on the negligent hiring.
Yes, I'm just nodding to all the things that you're saying, Stan, because I feel such a broken record when I say things similar to, really understanding what are the roles that folks are going to be in, and how, how that is reviewed as it relates to the roles that people are doing. And I also love the part that you said around, you went through this review of your processes and found that you're already hiring folks, and it's already, a significant percentage of your employee population. So thank you for that. In terms of other legal teams that are going through the same kind of review process and are thinking about fair chance hiring and how to expand it at their current organization, what's your advice to them?
Yeah, that's great advice. And so I think one of the things that's probably true, irrespective of the size of your organization and the particular industry that you operate in, is that you have significant spend on outside lawyers who are focused on labor and employment issues. These are the lawyers who if there's a claim, if there's a new benefits policy, if there's a new policy that comes out from the Biden administration, these are the outside lawyers that you go and talk to. Well, those outside lawyers should be providing some additional benefit to you by explaining what are, if any, what are the regulatory barriers that you need to be aware of if your company wants to engage in intentional second chance hiring. That's on them. I don't expect every lawyer, because we're already overworked as in-house counsel, but what I do expect is the outside lawyers that you engage to be able to provide you some advice and counsel on this particular issue. And so that's one of the things that we did immediately, was to make sure that we've got kind of the blessing and the guidance from our outside lawyers who may be aware of certain regulatory barriers that even our internal team just wouldn't know and wouldn't have a reason to know. So I think step number one is to understand for your particular industry, what are the barriers, what are the workarounds, what's the real risk? And sometimes that goes jurisdiction to jurisdiction, depending on where you operate in the United States, because there are some states that are more favorable than others. The second thing that I think is critically important is a legal function cannot do this alone. And we'll come back to this later, because I think it's probably more appropriate for more developed question that's directed towards this. But the legal function can't operate alone. It has to work directly with your human resources team to understand where they're already operating, how they're thinking about this, and where, it's because you can't just push it out nationally, where from a specific geographic region is the culture ready for you to engage in intentional second chance hiring. So let me pause there.
That's really great, Stan, and it's awesome to get such robust, tangible advice about how best to kind of put the right foot forward and making progress on some of these efforts. I really quickly want to circle back on the Second Chance Business Coalition. We know that it's roughly about 40 or so companies that have pledged to make jobs more accessible to people with past convictions, and would be curious to hear from your standpoint what some of your hopes are or even expectations are for this group and just the movement generally speaking.
Sure. So when we went out to all the companies and did our pitch and companies that are going to join shortly, what we said is that we wanted a very low bar for entry. You may recall back in 2016 under the Obama administration, there was a White House pledge that was trying to get people energized about this issue. And what we noticed is that since larger companies signed on to that pledge, there hadn't been a lot of progress since 2016. SHRM put out wonderful materials, and a lot of smaller companies who are operating in one jurisdiction were taking advantage of that. But in terms of multinational companies trying to scale this work up, there was a void. And that's why we decided to start the Second Chance Business Coalition. Now, to your question about what are our goals, what are our expectations? Our first is to educate. You've got to get people educated on this issue and get them up to speed on some practices that have just been underway for years, like ban the box. I mean, that's just something that is kind of table stakes at this point, but just making sure people understand how important that is. So to educate people on those practices and get them started. The next thing that we want companies to do is look internally to see where are areas where they can adjust their own processes and procedures. And I'll give you a great example. When it comes to temporary employees, one of the greatest pieces of feedback that we receive from temp agencies is that oftentimes companies are not explicit enough to let them know that they're open to justice-involved individuals working in their temporary roles. And so that's a very quick fix for a company to tell the temp agency that they're working with, we're open. We want these people to be a part of our organization. You don't have to do anything else. That's just quick. And so there are other processes, and we can go down the rabbit hole of making a decision, do these roles require a bachelor's degree or do they require more experience? And that's a whole other conversation. But the last part of it, just to kind of skip towards the other end of the spectrum of where we hope companies will go, is that we hope companies will make a decision that they will invest in specific jurisdictions and partner together to make those second chance hiring hubs, if you will. And so some of those areas that, JP Morgan is doing incredible work in Chicago. There are other companies that are working really well in places like Charlotte and Atlanta. And the purpose of working together and not operating in isolation is because we want justice-involved individuals to know that they have options. That Eaton doesn't want to do this by itself. I don't want someone feeling as though we're the only game in town. They deserve the right of choice. They deserve the right to know where they want to have their career started and to grow and to end. And so we want to partner together as a unit and to operate in specific jurisdictions, partnering with the government in those jurisdictions, and most importantly, wraparound services so that we can ensure the retention and the advancement of justice-involved individuals in our organization. So again, starting with education, introspection, and then partnership in specific jurisdictions where we can create hubs where folks feel very comfortable and they have a choice of the employer that they want to work with.
Yeah, I love the intention of learning together and also working together. I think that you're so right, Stan, in terms of, these multiple large employers, the influence that they have working together, but second, the support that they have, one, to each other in terms of best practices, how do we best support employees, but two, in terms of what you said, I love it, giving folks options in terms of, it's not just this one employer who's hiring folks that have been justice involved, but it's these whole host of employers, and they have all of these resources, and that this is how they're connected. It's really great and such a great vision. Is there any other kind of advice or things that you'd like to add in terms of just general advice for folks that are thinking about fair chance hiring at their employer?
Yeah, so I'd give two things. Number one, I talked about this a little bit earlier, is that, you know, the legal team can't operate alone. And if you replace me with the chief human resource officer, HR can't operate alone. And I've said this a couple of times, is that, you know, this journey, it can't be done in the Miata. You need a bus. You need a lot of people internally on this bus to get it done. And so one of the best things that you can do early on is to talk to your leadership and say, give me a champion from each internal function. Give me a champion from HR, government relations, from our communications team, from legal, from the individuals who are responsible for our factories. Give me somebody from each function so that I know from the outset where we're going and how to best engage people and get buy-in. Because the last thing that you want is to have one person or two people saying, hey, this is really great, but no one else in your organization feels attached to it. They don't have any ownership of this process. And so get people on the bus early and decide, you know, for your organization, what's most appropriate, and put a game plan together. The second thing that I think is really important, and it's a part of that initial process, is don't try to reinvent the wheel. There are some truly incredible nonprofit organizations who have worked with a number of corporations, large and small, who've done this in specific jurisdictions. And so the tendency for large corporations, because it's just in our DNA, is we want to scale up. Day one, scale up. How do we get this national? Foolish. This is not a national game. This is a local ground game. And so the best thing that you can do is to pick a jurisdiction that works well, find a nonprofit organization that has experience in this, and I'll throw out one, I'll name drop. CCT's, the Center for Community Transitions in Charlotte, is phenomenal. You want a crash course, call them. Phenomenal. But have those conversations with those folks and get an understanding of, what am I in for here? And what does this really take? And where have companies failed? That early education, that early gut check on what you're really in for and what it's going to take will expedite your learning process so quickly. And it's something that will help you in the long run. So again, my parting words on this issue, and thank you for the opportunity to speak with you. My parting statement would be, is take your time. You don't have to solve the world's problems overnight. And the reason you should take your time is, as we talk about the 70 million individuals who are a part of the justice system, I'm focused on the one who's a part of your organization. And if you play your cards right, and if you get one person's career on the upward trajectory, let's play it on a one-by-one basis and not focus on trying to solve all of it at once, because that's a surefire way to fail.
Oh man, what a perfect note to end this conversation on. Stan, very clearly this has been a really rich and fulfilling discussion, and we can't thank you enough for your perspective and expertise today. I know Alex and we always learn so much from our conversations together, and we're really excited that the broader audience has an opportunity to hear from you about how companies, and particularly their legal teams, can really approach the development of proactive fair chance hiring initiatives. So Stan, we look forward to hearing more about all of yours and Eaton's ongoing progress. And quite frankly, we hope to have you back soon for another conversation in the future. So thanks so much for the time.
Thank you, Solomon. Thank you, Alex.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.